My name is Rachel Wilson, I'm 32, and I've spent years listening to my family mock my financial failures. With their designer clothes and luxury cars, they never noticed I was building an empire. At last year's family meeting, Aunt Patricia announced her brilliant investment opportunity in an apartment building. I recognized the address immediately. What they didn't know was that I already owned it. Before I tell you how I silenced my entire judgmental family, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you enjoy stories about sweet, sweet karma. Growing up in the Wilson family meant one thing: appearances were everything. From our earliest days, success was measured in designer labels, luxury vehicles, and vacation photos that screamed, "We've made it." This mentality was drilled into all of us cousins, though some more than others. I wasn't always on the receiving end of their judgment. When my parents were alive, we were comfortable middle class. Not extravagant like Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, but comfortable. Then came the car accident when I was 15. In one night, I lost both my parents and my sense of security. While my aunt and uncle grudgingly attended the funeral, it was my grandmother Eleanor who stepped up. "Rachel, darling," she said after the service, her weathered hand clasping mine, "you're coming home with me." Grandmother Eleanor lived modestly in a small house across town, the wrong part of town according to Aunt Patricia. She had never bought into the family's obsession with status. Instead, she taught me things that would actually matter: financial literacy, hard work, and how to spot opportunity where others saw nothing. Meanwhile, my cousins continued their charmed lives. Stephanie, 2 years older than me, attended an exclusive private college where she studied fashion design. Her parents bankrolled her lifestyle: the apartment in New York, the semester abroad in Paris, the endless shopping sprees justified as research. Every family gathering featured a new designer outfit, always accompanied by the not-so-subtle mention of its price tag. Marcus, my male cousin closest to my age, followed the family-approved path to an Ivy League business school. Uncle Robert made sure everyone knew about the legacy admission and his generous donations to the alumni fund. Marcus emerged with an investment banking position, a sports car he couldn't really afford, and an attitude that suggested he'd earned it all himself. Then there was Allison, the youngest cousin and social media darling. Her Instagram showed exotic locations, exclusive parties, and an endless parade of enviable moments. What it didn't show was how each post was carefully staged, sometimes in studios designed to look like luxury locations. Her influencer status brought in some free products, but nowhere near the lifestyle she pretended to have. While they were collecting degrees from prestigious universities, I was taking night classes at community college and working 2 jobs. Such a shame, I'd overhear Aunt Patricia say, "Without proper education, Rachel will never amount to much." What she didn't understand was that I was getting exactly the education I needed: practical, focused, and debt-free. After community college, I took real estate courses while working as an administrative assistant at a property management company. I soaked up everything I could about the business: how to evaluate properties, manage renovations, and most importantly, spot undervalued opportunities. While my cousins were building impressive-looking lives funded by my aunt and uncle, I was quietly building something real. Our annual family gatherings became exercises in subtle humiliation. They'd arrive in their luxury vehicles, sporting designer clothes and fresh tans from exotic vacations. I'd pull up in my reliable but modest sedan, wearing well-made but ordinary clothes. The contrast was deliberate on my part. I had money, but I chose to invest it rather than wear it. "Rachel, darling," Aunt Patricia would say, air-kissing both cheeks, "that shirt is so durable-looking. Very practical." Her emphasis made it clear this wasn't a compliment. Grandmother Eleanor watched these interactions with knowing eyes. "Patience," she'd whisper to me. "Empty vessels make the most noise." Last year's gathering was at my aunt and uncle's sprawling mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. As I pulled into the circular driveway, wedging my sedan between Marcus's Porsche and Stephanie's BMW, I took a deep breath. Through the tall windows, I could see them already assembled, champagne flutes in hand, laughing at something undoubtedly impressive someone had said. I straightened my simple blazer, quality material but not a recognizable brand, and walked up the steps. The heavy door opened before I could knock, and there stood Uncle Robert, martini in hand. "Rachel," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We were wondering if you'd make it." "Busy with what is it you do again?" "Property assistant." "Property manager," I corrected, stepping past him into the marble-floored entryway. I didn't bother explaining that I hadn't been anyone's assistant for years. Let them think what they wanted. For now, the inside of Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert's mansion was a monument to conspicuous consumption. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, Persian rugs covered marble floors, and original artwork lined the walls. Every piece seemed carefully selected not for personal enjoyment, but for its ability to impress visitors. I found the family gathered in the great room, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens and a swimming pool that was used maybe twice a year. Stephanie was holding court on one of the custom sofas, showing off her latest designer handbag. "It's a limited edition," she was explaining to Allison, who was discreetly taking photos for her Instagram. "Only 50 made worldwide." The waiting list was 2 years, but the design director is a personal friend, so she trailed off with a humble shrug that was anything but humble. Marcus stood by the marble fireplace, swirling an amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. He was deep in conversation with Uncle Robert about market forecasts, his voice loud enough to ensure everyone could hear his expertise. "The market's shifting," he proclaimed. "My team is positioning our clients ahead of the curve. Last quarter alone, we managed transactions totaling over $200 million. What he wasn't mentioning was the rumor I'd heard through industry connections that his division was actually underperforming and he was on thin ice with management. Grandmother Eleanor was seated in a wingback chair near the window, watching the family performance with amused detachment. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine warmth. "There's my brilliant girl," she said, extending her arms for a hug. I embraced her, drawing comfort from her familiar scent of lavender and wisdom. "How are you holding up with the circus?" I whispered. "Oh, I'm enjoying the show," she replied with a wink. "And looking forward to the next act." Aunt Patricia swooped in before we could continue our conversation, glass of champagne in hand. "Rachel, darling, we were just discussing Stephanie's new vacation property in Aspen. Have you ever been?" "Oh, but of course not." She answered her own question with a sympathetic smile. "Perhaps someday." I accepted the champagne she offered and took a small sip. "I've been focused on other investments," I said simply. "Investments?" Uncle Robert laughed, overhearing as he approached. "Is that what we're calling that little apartment of yours these days?" I didn't bother correcting him about my little apartment, a renovated industrial loft in a rapidly appreciating neighborhood. Let him think I lived in some dingy studio. "Robert, be nice," Aunt Patricia admonished without conviction. "Rachel is doing her best with what she has." The backhanded defense was possibly worse than the original insult. As the family continued to mill about, showing off purchases and one-upping each other with stories of success, I observed subtle signs that all was not as prosperous as it appeared. Marcus checked his watch whenever his phone pinged, his expression tightening slightly, possibly creditors calling. Stephanie's designer clothes were from last season, not the current one as she claimed. And Allison kept stepping away to take calls that sounded suspiciously like arguments with bill collectors. Around 7, Aunt Patricia called everyone to the dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a table that could seat 20. The walls displayed original oil paintings of ancestors who looked down with stern disapproval. The chandelier alone probably cost more than most people's cars. Before dinner, Aunt Patricia announced as everyone took their assigned seats, "I wanted to discuss an exciting investment opportunity I've identified. Something the whole family could participate in." My ears perked up. This was unusual. Typically, these gatherings were simply for showing off, not actual business discussions. "As you know," she continued, taking her place at one end of the table while Uncle Robert sat at the other. "Robert and I have always had an eye for value, and we've identified a property that presents exceptional potential." She nodded to Uncle Robert, who activated a projector. On the wall appeared an image of a brick apartment building, a well-maintained Art Deco structure in the trendy West Side neighborhood. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized that building immediately. Not just because it was a distinctive property, but because 2 weeks ago, I had finalized its purchase through my LLC. The Parkview Apartments, Aunt Patricia announced proudly. 18 units in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Currently undervalued, but poised for significant appreciation. I took a slow sip of water, watching this presentation with growing amazement. How had they identified the same property I had? And more importantly, did they not know it had already been sold? "We've arranged a special viewing with the selling agent tomorrow," Uncle Robert added. "The current owner is motivated to sell quickly. If we pool family resources, we could acquire it at a favorable price." I nearly choked on my water. The motivated seller had accepted my offer 2 weeks ago. The paperwork was finalized. The building was mine. As they continued outlining their plans for the property, many of which ironically mirrored my own, I debated what to do. Should I speak up now? Or wait and see how this played out? Family investments build generational wealth, and Patricia was saying. Of course, contributions would be proportional to means. Those with greater resources would have larger shares. Her gaze swept meaningfully over Marcus and Stephanie, then landed on me with a patronizing smile. And those with more modest means could participate at whatever level they're comfortable with. Even a small stake would be educational. The condescension was unmistakable. In their eyes, I would be the charity case, included as a learning experience rather than a true partner. I decided to remain quiet for now. Let them finish their presentation. Let them show their full hand before I revealed mine. As servers brought in the first course, some pretentious tiny salad with exactly 3 leaves and a drizzle of something expensive, Aunt Patricia called the family meeting officially to order. "Let's begin with updates from everyone," she said. "Marcus, why don't you start us off? I understand your division has been performing exceptionally well." I settled in, watching the family theater play out while mentally preparing for my own unexpected role in the final act. Marcus straightened his Italian silk tie and cleared his throat. "Well, as I was telling Dad earlier, my team closed over $200 million in transactions last quarter. We've positioned our highest value clients ahead of market shifts that the average investor won't see coming until it's too late." What he carefully avoided mentioning were the rumors of his division's underperformance and his increasingly precarious position. I'd heard through industry connections that he'd been moved to a less desirable office and had lost 2 major clients in the past month. "The firm is fast-tracking me for partner," he concluded with practiced modesty. "Youngest in the company's history." Uncle Robert beamed with pride, while Aunt Patricia nodded approvingly. "We always knew you had extraordinary potential," she said. Stephanie went next, detailing her latest fashion industry connections. "My capsule collection is being featured in Vogue next month," she announced, conveniently failing to mention it was a tiny sidebar in the digital edition, not the print magazine. "And I've been invited to Paris Fashion Week as a special guest designer." What I knew, through a former college classmate who worked in publishing, was that Stephanie's invitation had been purchased through a PR agency for a substantial fee. Her designs weren't selling particularly well, but her parents' connections kept her afloat in the industry. Allison shared her latest social media triumphs. boasting about brand partnerships and growing follower counts. "I've just hit 1 million followers," she said, not acknowledging that a significant percentage were purchased bots. "And I've signed with a major talent agency for exclusive representation." The major talent agency was actually a small startup desperately trying to establish itself by taking on anyone with a moderate social media presence. When it was finally my turn, all eyes turned to me with varying degrees of mild curiosity and preemptive judgment. "Rachel, darling," Aunt Patricia prompted. "What's new in your world?" "Still with that property management company." I took a small sip of water before answering. "Actually, I left that position 3 years ago to focus on my own business." "Oh!" Uncle Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. "What sort of business?" "Real estate investment and property development," I said simply. A brief silence followed, then Marcus let out a small laugh. "Investment? With what capital?" I could have told them about the careful saving, the strategic first purchase, the gradual building of my portfolio. Instead, I kept it vague. "I started small and reinvested the profits." "How resourceful," Aunt Patricia said with the tone one might use to praise a child's crayon drawing. "It's good to have hobbies that could potentially become more substantial someday." Stephanie tilted her head. "Where are these properties?" "Anywhere we would know." "Mostly local," I answered. "I focus on undervalued buildings with good bones in transitioning neighborhoods." "Transitioning," Uncle Robert repeated with a knowing smirk to Marcus. "That's real estate speak for still dangerous, but we're hoping poor people get pushed out soon." I let the mischaracterization stand. My actual strategy involved improving properties while keeping them affordable for existing residents, but I didn't expect them to understand or appreciate that approach. "So you're what?" "A landlord for student apartments and low-income housing," Marcus asked, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Among other things," I replied. "Well," Aunt Patricia interjected with forced brightness, "it's good you're trying something entrepreneurial, even on a small scale. Experience is valuable, regardless of success." The condescension was so thick it could have been served as the next course. "Speaking of housing," Uncle Robert pivoted, "have you managed to buy a place of your own yet, Rachel? Still renting that little apartment downtown?" Before I could answer, Stephanie jumped in. "Didn't you say the building was having plumbing issues? That sounds dreadful." I hadn't said anything of the sort, but it fit their narrative of my struggling existence. "I'm comfortable with my current living situation," I said simply. Marcus leaned forward with exaggerated concern. "You know, Rachel, there's no shame in asking for help. Financial literacy isn't everyone's strong suit. Some people just aren't wired for success in that area," Allison added with false sympathy. "I could recommend some entry-level investment options," Marcus continued. "Things even someone with minimal capital could manage." The patronizing offers continued around the table, each family member finding new ways to frame my presumed financial incompetence as some kind of adorable quirk rather than a serious deficiency. "I remember when you were little," Aunt Patricia reminisced. "You always had trouble saving your allowance." "Some things don't change, do they?" Grandmother Eleanor, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Rachel has always been wiser with money than the rest of you give her credit for." "Mother, please," Aunt Patricia dismissed. "We're trying to help." Rachel clearly can't even afford to purchase a modest home in this market. There's no shame in that, but pretending she's some sort of real estate investor is just setting her up for disappointment. Uncle Robert laughed outright. "Next she'll be telling us she's looking at commercial properties." The laughter spread around the table, with Marcus adding, "Maybe she can invest in our Parkview Apartments deal with her vast portfolio returns." I maintained my composure as the mockery continued, watching them enjoy their perceived superiority. Grandmother Eleanor caught my eye across the table and gave me the slightest nod, her expression suggesting she knew something the others didn't. As the laughter subsided, Aunt Patricia steered the conversation back to the apartment building investment. "Now, as I was saying before, the Parkview apartments represent an exceptional opportunity. 18 units. Prime location, below market asking price. The presentation continued with projected returns and renovation plans. The numbers they were working with were actually quite good. I had done similar calculations myself when evaluating the property. We'd like everyone to participate, Aunt Patricia concluded, her gaze moving around the table before landing on me. Rachel, dear, obviously we don't expect you to contribute at the same level as the others. Perhaps a token amount? It would be educational for you. Or, Uncle Robert added with a patronizing smile, if that's still beyond your means, we could loan you the money for a small share. Consider it an investment in your financial education. The room erupted in poorly concealed snickering again. So thoughtful of you, I replied evenly. Before I decide, I'd like to know more about the property. Have you had it professionally inspected? While my family continued discussing the Parkview apartments investment, my mind drifted back to the journey that had led me to this moment, a journey they knew nothing about. After my parents died, grandmother Eleanor became my anchor. Unlike the rest of the family, she understood the value of quiet, steady progress over flashy displays. Wealth whispers, Rachel, she would tell me. Remember that. I graduated from community college with an associate's degree in business administration and no debt. While my cousins were still partying through their expensive university experiences, I was already working full-time at Wilson Property Management, no relation to our family. My position as an administrative assistant wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a front-row seat to the real estate industry. I watched how properties were evaluated, managed, and improved. I saw which investments paid off and which ones flopped. Most importantly, I learned that successful real estate investment wasn't about luck, it was about research, timing, and vision. I lived frugally in a studio apartment, banking most of my salary. By the time I was 24, I had saved enough for a down payment on my first investment property, a rundown duplex in a neighborhood that city planning documents, which I'd studied extensively, indicated was slated for revitalization. The duplex was a lesson in everything that could go wrong. The inspection missed major plumbing issues. One tenant stopped paying rent and took months to evict. A storm damaged the roof. But with each crisis, I learned. I took night classes in basic home repair to save on maintenance costs. I developed better tenant screening procedures. I built relationships with reliable contractors. After 18 grueling months, I sold the duplex for a modest profit, nothing that would impress my family, but enough to reinvest in a slightly larger property, a 4-unit building in a similar transitional neighborhood. Around this time, I met Thomas Griffin, a veteran real estate investor who became my mentor. I had attended one of his seminars and afterward approached him with specific questions that demonstrated I'd done my homework. Most people want magic formulas, he told me over coffee. You're asking about zoning regulations and property tax reassessment triggers. That tells me you're serious. Thomas took me under his wing, teaching me to look beyond the obvious. Anyone can see value in a pristine building in an established neighborhood, he said. The real opportunity is in seeing what a property could become when others can only see what it is now. With Thomas's guidance, I refined my investment strategy. I focused on multifamily properties in overlooked neighborhoods that showed early signs of revival, new businesses opening, artists moving in, public transportation improvements planned. I developed relationships with local contractors who gave me honest assessments and fair prices. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts when the numbers and the neighborhood told a different story than the general market perception. By 27, I had quit my day job to focus on my growing portfolio. I created Horizon Properties, LLC to manage my investments with a business name that wouldn't immediately connect to me personally. Privacy became important, not just for my family, but in business negotiations. When sellers didn't know I was the buyer behind multiple properties, they couldn't leverage that information against me. One painful lesson came when I excitedly told Aunt Patricia about my first major successful property flip. Rather than showing interest or support, she had laughed and said, "Oh, Rachel. Playing real estate agent now? How cute." After that, I stopped sharing my business developments with the family. Instead, I channeled my energy into growth. I developed a reputation among local banks as a solid investment risk. My credit was excellent, my properties performed well, and my business plan was always meticulously researched. By 30, I was managing a portfolio of 32 units across 6 properties, all cash flow positive. When the Parkview Apartments came on my radar, it represented a significant step up. With 18 units in a prime location, it would be my largest acquisition yet. The building had good bones but needed updating, exactly the kind of value-add opportunity one looked for. I spent weeks researching the property, analyzing comparable sales, projecting renovation costs, and calculating potential returns. I walked the neighborhood at different times of day, spoke with local business owners, and reviewed city development plans for the area. Everything confirmed this was a solid investment with strong appreciation potential. The negotiations were intense. The seller had multiple interested parties, including a corporate investor with deeper pockets than mine. But I had built relationships with local lenders who believed in my track record. I secured favorable financing and made a clean, uncomplicated offer with a quick close, exactly what the motivated seller needed. 2 weeks before this family dinner, I had signed the final paperwork. The Parkview Apartments were mine through Horizon Properties LLC. The fact that my family had independently identified the same property validated my judgment, though I was puzzled by their claim to have arranged a viewing with the selling agent. That agent had already received his commission and moved on to other listings. As I tuned back into the dinner conversation, I realized they were discussing renovation budgets for a building they would never own. Part of me felt sympathy. They clearly hadn't done their due diligence if they didn't know the property had already sold. But a larger part remembered years of condescension and mockery, the constant implication that I was failing while they succeeded. Grandmother Eleanor caught my eye again and gave me a subtle wink. Somehow she knew. Whether she had connected the dots herself or had been following my career more closely than I realized, she understood what was about to happen. I took a deep breath. The moment of truth was approaching, and I was finally ready to step out of the shadows. "Have you had it professionally inspected?" I repeated my question about the Parkview Apartments, watching confusion flicker across Aunt Patricia's face. "Well, not yet," she admitted. "But the selling agent assures us it's in excellent condition. We have an inspector scheduled to visit after our viewing tomorrow." I nodded thoughtfully. "And what about the roof?" "It was replaced about 7 years ago. But there was some hail damage last spring that might need addressing." Uncle Robert frowned. "How would you know that?" "Just curious," I deflected. "What about the boiler system?" "It's original to the building but has been well maintained. Still, at that age, you should budget for replacement within 5 years. Marcus leaned forward, suspicion replacing mockery. "You seem to know a lot about this specific building." "I try to stay informed about the local market," I said with a shrug. "What rental increases are you projecting?" "The current rates are about 15% below market value." Aunt Patricia exchanged glances with Uncle Robert. Something wasn't adding up for them. "Rachel," Aunt Patricia said slowly, "have you perhaps looked at this property yourself?" I took a sip of water, letting the tension build. "You could say that. As if you could be a serious contender for an 18-unit building." Marcus scoffed, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. I reached for my handbag, a simple, quality leather tote rather than a flashy designer piece, and removed a folder. "Actually, I'm more than familiar with the Parkview Apartments. I've been tracking it for months." "Tracking it?" Uncle Robert repeated. "Market analysis, rental projections, renovation estimates." I explained, opening the folder. It's a solid property with excellent potential, especially with the new tech campus breaking ground 6 blocks away next year. Stephanie's eyebrows shot up. What tech campus? The one that hasn't been publicly announced yet, I said. But if you'd researched the property thoroughly, you'd have found the permit applications filed with the city planning department. The table fell silent as I pulled out the first document, a detailed property analysis I had prepared before making my offer. The building does need work, I continued conversationally. The electrical system was partially updated 10 years ago, but still has some knob and tube wiring in the north wing. The foundation is solid, but there's some settling on the southwest corner that should be monitored. And 3 units will need complete kitchen renovations. How do you know all this? Aunt Patricia demanded, her voice sharper now. I met her gaze directly. Because I've done my due diligence. I pulled out another document, the property deed, and placed it on the table. As the owner should. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Uncle Robert let out a bark of laughter. Owner? Don't be ridiculous. Horizon Properties LLC completed the purchase of the Parkview apartments 2 weeks ago, I stated calmly. I'm the sole proprietor of Horizon Properties. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clinking of silverware ceased as the servers, sensing the tension, retreated from the dining room. Aunt Patricia recovered first. That's impossible. We have a viewing scheduled tomorrow. I'm afraid the selling agent must have made a mistake, I replied. The property is no longer on the market. Marcus grabbed the deed, scanning it with increasingly frantic eyes. This could be fake. Anyone could print this up. Feel free to check the county property records, I offered. They were updated last week. Or call James Whitaker at Commercial Trust Bank. He handled the financing. Uncle Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You expect us to believe you purchased an entire apartment building? With what money? I slid another document across the table, a portfolio summary showing my complete real estate holdings. With returns from my other investments. I currently own 47 units across 7 properties, including Parkview. All cash flow positive, with an average cap rate of 8.2%. Stephanie snatched the paper. Her designer bracelets clinking. This says you have properties worth over $5 million. 5.8 after the Parkview acquisition, I corrected. Though with planned improvements, I project the portfolio value to exceed $7 million by next year. This is absurd, Uncle Robert sputtered. Some kind of elaborate prank. It's no prank. Robert, Grandmother Eleanor spoke up, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable satisfaction. Rachel has been building her business for years while the rest of you were too busy showing off to notice. Allison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly gasped. Wait. Horizon Properties, that's my management company. The one that owns my building. All eyes turned to her. You rent from Horizon Properties? I asked, though I already knew the answer. When Allison had been looking for a prestigious address for her influencer persona, she had unknowingly applied to rent one of my renovated luxury units. I had recognized her name, but allowed the property manager to handle it as they would any other application. And mine, Stephanie whispered, realization dawning. The Crawford Street Apartments. Marcus paled. The Madison Heights complex. That's one of yours too. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. Yes. Interesting coincidence, isn't it? You've all been my tenants for quite some time. The room erupted into chaos. Uncle Robert demanded more proof. Aunt Patricia accused me of lying. Marcus started frantically searching property records on his phone. Stephanie appeared to be in shock. Throughout it all, Grandmother Eleanor watched with the serene smile of someone who had long anticipated this moment. I remained calm, answering their increasingly desperate questions with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. I produced more documentation, bank statements, property tax records, business licenses until the evidence became undeniable. I don't understand, Aunt Patricia finally said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. How did you do this without any of us knowing? I tried to tell you, in the beginning, I reminded her. After my first property, you called it cute and changed the subject to Stephanie's internship. After that, I saw no reason to keep you informed. The realization that they had been living in buildings I owned, that their rent checks had been going into my business accounts, seemed to hit them all at once. The power dynamic that had defined our family for years had just been completely upended. So, all this time, Marcus said slowly, while we thought you were struggling. I was building something real. I finished for him. Something that will last. Have you had it professionally inspected? I repeated my question about the Parkview apartments, watching confusion flicker across Aunt Patricia's face. Well, not yet, she admitted. But the selling agent assures us it's in excellent condition. We have an inspector scheduled to visit after our viewing tomorrow. I nodded thoughtfully. And what about the roof? It was replaced about 7 years ago. But there was some hail damage last spring that might need addressing. Uncle Robert frowned. How would you know that? Just curious, I deflected. What about the boiler system? It's original to the building but has been well maintained. Still, at that age, you should budget for replacement within 5 years. Marcus leaned forward, suspicion replacing mockery. You seem to know a lot about this specific building. I try to stay informed about the local market, I said with a shrug. What rental increases are you projecting? The current rates are about 15% below market value. Aunt Patricia exchanged glances with Uncle Robert. Something wasn't adding up for them. Rachel, Aunt Patricia said slowly, have you perhaps looked at this property yourself? I took a sip of water, letting the tension build. You could say that. As if you could be a serious contender for an 18-unit building. Marcus scoffed, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. I reached for my handbag, a simple, quality leather tote rather than a flashy designer piece, and removed a folder. Actually, I'm more than familiar with the Parkview apartments. I've been tracking it for months. Tracking it, Uncle Robert repeated. Market analysis, rental projections, renovation estimates. I explained, opening the folder. It's a solid property with excellent potential, especially with the new tech campus breaking ground 6 blocks away next year. Stephanie's eyebrows shot up. What tech campus? The one that hasn't been publicly announced yet, I said. But if you'd researched the property thoroughly, you'd have found the permit applications filed with the city planning department. The table fell silent as I pulled out the first document, a detailed property analysis I had prepared before making my offer. The building does need work, I continued conversationally. The electrical system was partially updated 10 years ago, but still has some knob and tube wiring in the north wing. The foundation is solid, but there's some settling on the southwest corner that should be monitored. And 3 units will need complete kitchen renovations. How do you know all this? Aunt Patricia demanded, her voice sharper now. I met her gaze directly. Because I've done my due diligence. I pulled out another document, the property deed, and placed it on the table. As the owner should. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Uncle Robert let out a bark of laughter. Owner? Don't be ridiculous. Horizon Properties LLC completed the purchase of the Parkview apartments 2 weeks ago, I stated calmly. I'm the sole proprietor of Horizon Properties. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clinking of silverware ceased as the servers, sensing the tension, retreated from the dining room. Aunt Patricia recovered first. That's impossible. We have a viewing scheduled tomorrow. I'm afraid the selling agent must have made a mistake, I replied. The property is no longer on the market. Marcus grabbed the deed, scanning it with increasingly frantic eyes. This could be fake. Anyone could print this up. Feel free to check the county property records, I offered. They were updated last week. Or call James Whitaker at Commercial Trust Bank. He handled the financing. Uncle Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You expect us to believe you purchased an entire apartment building? With what money? I slid another document across the table, a portfolio summary showing my complete real estate holdings, with returns from my other investments. I currently own 47 units across 7 properties, including Parkview. All cash flow positive, with an average cap rate of 8.2%. Stephanie snatched the paper, her designer bracelets clinking. This says you have properties worth over $5 million. 5.8 after the Parkview acquisition, I corrected. Though with planned improvements, I project the portfolio value to exceed $7 million by next year. This is absurd, Uncle Robert sputtered. Some kind of elaborate prank. It's no prank. Robert, Grandmother Eleanor spoke up, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable satisfaction. Rachel has been building her business for years while the rest of you were too busy showing off to notice. Allison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly gasped. Wait. Horizon Properties? That's my management company. The one that owns my building. All eyes turned to her. You rent from Horizon Properties? I asked, though I already knew the answer. When Allison had been looking for a prestigious address for her influencer persona, she had unknowingly applied to rent one of my renovated luxury units. I had recognized her name, but allowed the property manager to handle it as they would any other application. And mine, Stephanie whispered, realization dawning. The Crawford Street Apartments. Marcus paled. The Madison Heights complex. That's one of yours too. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. Yes. Interesting coincidence, isn't it? You've all been my tenants for quite some time. The room erupted into chaos. Uncle Robert demanded more proof. Aunt Patricia accused me of lying. Marcus started frantically searching property records on his phone. Stephanie appeared to be in shock. Throughout it all, Grandmother Eleanor watched with the serene smile of someone who had long anticipated this moment. I remained calm, answering their increasingly desperate questions with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. I produced more documentation, bank statements, property tax records, business licenses until the evidence became undeniable. I don't understand, Aunt Patricia finally said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. How did you do this without any of us knowing? I tried to tell you, in the beginning, I reminded her. After my first property, you called it cute and changed the subject to Stephanie's internship. After that, I saw no reason to keep you informed. The realization that they had been living in buildings I owned, that their rent checks had been going into my business accounts, seemed to hit them all at once. The power dynamic that had defined our family for years had just been completely upended. So, all this time, Marcus said slowly, while we thought you were struggling. I was building something real, I finished for him. Something that will last. 3 months after the revelatory family dinner, I stood in the newly renovated lobby of the Parkview apartments. The Art Deco details had been carefully restored, the lighting updated to energy-efficient fixtures that complemented the historical character, and the security system modernized for current resident needs. It was a perfect balance of preservation and progress, respecting the building's heritage while ensuring its future. The final unit renovations will be completed by next week, my project manager, Tina, reported as we walked through the building. We're on schedule and just slightly under budget. Excellent work, I praised, making notes on my tablet. And the tenant feedback? Overwhelmingly positive. They appreciate that we worked around their schedules and that the improvements didn't come with dramatic rent increases. That had been important to me. Unlike many investors who used renovations as an excuse to push out existing tenants and double the rent, I believed in community stability. My model allowed for reasonable returns while keeping housing affordable for those already living there. Ms. Wilson. A voice called from behind us. I turned to see Mrs. Chen, an elderly resident who had lived in the building for nearly 30 years. I wanted to thank you personally for the new kitchen. For the first time in decades, all 4 burners work simultaneously. I smiled warmly. I'm glad to hear it, Mrs. Chen. If you notice anything else that needs attention, please don't hesitate to let us know. This was the real reward of my work, not the financial returns, though those were certainly welcome, but the tangible improvements in people's daily lives. Each functioning appliance, each secure lock, each efficient heating system represented real quality of life for actual human beings. It was something my family had never understood about my business philosophy. Speaking of family, they had been uncharacteristically quiet since the dinner revelation. The initial flurry of phone calls offering partnerships and collaborations had tapered off after my consistent but polite refusals. Now, our interactions had settled into something new, not quite warm, but no longer condescending. Aunt Patricia had called last week about the upcoming annual family gathering. We were thinking something more casual this year, she'd said, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. Perhaps a potluck at Grandmother Eleanor's. Would you be willing to attend? The suggestion of a potluck at my grandmother's modest home rather than a formal dinner at their mansion was itself a seismic shift. I'd like that, I'd told her, genuinely meaning it. After finishing the property inspection, I drove to Grandmother Eleanor's house for our weekly tea. These visits had been our tradition since my parents died, a constant in an ever-changing world. There she is, Grandmother called cheerfully as I entered her cozy living room. My real estate mogul. I laughed, bending to kiss her cheek. Hardly a mogul. Tell that to Patricia and Robert. She chuckled. I've never seen them so humbled. It's been good for them. We settled in with tea and homemade cookies, and I updated her on the Parkview renovations. You know, she said thoughtfully, your approach reminds me of your grandfather. He always said business was about more than profit. It was about creating value. I wish I could have known him, I said, reaching for another cookie. He would have been incredibly proud of you. She patted my hand. Not just for your success, but for how you achieved it. With integrity. Speaking of family, I ventured, have you spoken with Aunt Patricia about the potluck? Grandmother's eyes twinkled. Oh, yes. She called to ask if I needed any help cleaning the house before everyone arrives. Patricia, offering to clean. I nearly dropped the phone. We shared a laugh at this unprecedented development. And the others? I asked. Marcus called to see if he could bring anything. Claimed he's learned to make a pasta salad. She shook her head in amused disbelief. Stephanie offered to come early to help set up rather than arriving fashionably late. And Allison asked if she could interview me about family recipes for her social media. Apparently, authenticity is trending. These small gestures represented significant shifts in family dynamics. For years, they had expected to be served and admired. Now, they were learning to contribute. They're trying, I acknowledged. It's a start. Indeed. Grandmother sipped her tea thoughtfully. You know, wealth does strange things to people. It can become a prison of appearances. Your aunt and uncle have been trapped in that prison for so long they forgot there was any other way to live. And now they're facing some financial realities they've long ignored. Robert's investment firm has been underperforming. Patricia's social standing isn't what it once was. The children are discovering that Instagram followers don't pay the bills. She smiled wryly. Your success came at the perfect time to teach them all a valuable lesson. I hadn't known about their financial challenges, though I'd suspected issues beneath the glossy surface. I don't want them to struggle, I said honestly. Of course you don't. You're not vindictive, that's why you're successful. Grandmother set down her teacup decisively. Genuine success comes from creating value, not appearances. You understood that instinctively. We talked until evening, discussing future investments and family dynamics in equal measure. As I prepared to leave, Grandmother handed me a small, wrapped package. What's this? I asked. Surprised. Open it, she urged with a smile. Inside was a set of old keys on a faded leather keychain. These were your grandfather's, she explained. He carried them every day, keys to his first property investment. He kept them long after selling the building as a reminder of where he started. My throat tightened with emotion. Grandmother, I can't take these. You absolutely can and will, she insisted. He would have wanted you to have them. To remember that empires start with a single door being unlocked. I clutched the keys tightly, deeply moved by the connection to a grandfather I'd never known, but whose values had somehow found their way to me. Driving home to my loft, I reflected on the journey of the past few months and years. The family that had once dismissed me now viewed me with newfound respect. The business I had built quietly was now thriving openly. The path I had chosen against their advice had proven more successful than anyone could have imagined. Yet the greatest success wasn't in the properties I owned or the wealth I'd accumulated. It was in the confidence I'd developed, the purpose I'd discovered, and the knowledge that I was creating something meaningful, something that improved lives rather than just impressing people. In choosing substance over appearance, I had found fulfillment that no designer label or luxury vacation could provide. True wealth, I had learned, wasn't about what you owned or how others perceived you. It was about creating value, living with integrity, and finding satisfaction in the journey itself. As for my family, I hoped our relationship would continue to evolve, not back to what it had been, that wasn't possible or desirable, but forward into something healthier, more authentic, and mutually respectful. The keys in my pocket were a tangible reminder that every great achievement begins with a single step, often taken when no one else is watching or believing in you. Success isn't measured by others' approval, but by the value you create and the person you become along the way. I wonder about you watching this video. What dreams are you building quietly while others may be underestimating you? Are there people in your life who don't see your true potential? Remember that sometimes the sweetest success is the kind that no one sees coming. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more stories of unexpected triumph, and share with someone who might need this reminder today. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Thank you for watching. And remember, true wealth isn't what you show, it's what you build.